Hi, everyone. Welcome to our April SimCity rounds. It's my great pleasure to introduce my colleague and friend, Dr. Andrew Petrosoniak, who is an emergency physician and trauma team leader at St. Mike's Hospital. He's the medical director of the simulation program at the Unity Health Toronto and an assistant professor at the University of Toronto, where his research work focuses on using in situ simulation to improve systems and design, and two, optimizing the care of bleeding patients. He regularly publishes on and speaks at conferences on topics of resuscitation and simulation. He's also the president of Advanced Performance Healthcare Design, a design and consulting firm that trains high-performance teams and uses simulation to optimize healthcare delivery. Thank you so much for joining us today, Andrew. The floor is yours.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And thank you, Petal, for having me. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks for Ricardo for getting all of this set up. I'm going to just share the screen now and we will dig in. Can you guys see everything?
Yes, your screen looks
Great.
good, and I'll keep track of the chat for you too, Andrew.
Yeah, please. Yeah, because I'm just on one screen, so I
Yeah,
won't be able to
I know
see
it's
this
hard.
chat necessarily. So I will certainly welcome thoughts in the chat in real time. There will be time at the end for sure to discuss this. I guess I hope that this maybe spurs conversation rather than I don't expect, or I'm not coming at this pretending like I know a lot about AI. I do use it regularly. But I think the possibilities are really quite endless. I gave a talk similar to this a few now probably 8 months ago, which is like 3 versions of Chat GPT ago. And I think my perspective has changed. And I'm more enthusiastic about the opportunities than I was. But I hope that people maybe they challenge these ideas, maybe they resonate, but I'd love to hear about them. Just before like we get into it, this is not a simulation recount, but this is just showed me sort of the power of which were these AI tools, and this one particularly LLM has value. I was listening to an emergency medicine podcast, and just maybe in March, and they often start with a case that's kind of weird and tricky and difficult to kind of figure out. And the end result was a very esoteric diagnosis. And I thought, wow, that's really, I didn't see that coming. And they kind of, the podcast folks kind of walk you through the case. And I thought, why don't I put this into ChatGPT? And I just gave the brief vignette of a woman who presented with abdominal pain and was presented with some weird neurologic symptoms, dystonia. But that was it. That's all I put in. Otherwise, healthy. I'm putting it into ChatGPT just to see. And I asked, what's the most likely diagnosis? And it got it. It's a very rare encephalitis, anti-NMDMA encephalitis that likely comes from a tumor in the abdomen. It was remarkable that's what it gave me as the most likely diagnosis, and was certainly on the differential. And so I think it just speaks to the power of which, this is just an LLM. This is not, data analysis. These are tools that are easily accessible, readily accessible. But it speaks to what, the speed at which these models are getting revised and improving, and the ability to deal with massive amounts of data and really get us good quality thoughts. I guess I'll use that word in quotes. So have I taken the AI bet? I guess I have. I think that I think that if you ask me whether it's going to stay or go, I'm going to take it. Is it going to be value add or not? I'm going to say it's value add. So I'm leaning into it. We're going to talk a bit about, across simulation, where these sort of fit within education, systems, design, patient safety, and really kind of go from there. But the question is how do we embrace AI within simulation? And I thought, well, why not put this into ChatGPT? I'm giving a talk. Let's see what it would spit out in terms of, an outline. And here it is. It even gives me a little exclamation mark. Got it, exclamation mark. Here's a more tailored outline for your talk. Nice little talk that's a little different than what I'm going to give. But overall, pretty solid with some interesting ideas, and certainly a pretty good starting point. And so these, I'm using LLMs as an example because I think they're the most readily accessible that most of us are probably exposed to on a regular basis. But it does speak to what we can do with AI. And just so background, just so we're all talking the same language, AI sort of refers to the idea that a computer kind of works in a bit of an algorithmic sort of way. Machine learning is a subset of that. Machine learning would be the example that Netflix uses. So if it sees your preferences and then it gives you further ideas of things that you may want to watch, or if you're on Spotify, perhaps it'll suggest some songs for you. Then we have deep learning, which is what we're talking about when we think about LLMs. I think this is the stuff that's actually quite interesting. This is the stuff that will move the needle longer term. And that's kind of what we'll, be speaking about today more likely. Is this idea that we can interact with computers and a computer has effectively neural networks. So it's been designed, the model has been designed to really, quote, think like a human or give you responses the way that you might imagine a human is thinking. In reality, it's not quite like that. It scans large amounts of words and data and looks to see associations, but in such a robust way that that's what sort of it will give you back when you're talking about a large language model, which would be a subset of deep learning. And so that's, I think, where we're going to kind of focus. And here's my bottom line up front. I don't think it's a panacea. AI, humans will still need to exist. So that's a good thing for all of us. Clinicians will still need to exist. Educators will still need to exist. Simulationists will still need to exist. But it does represent a fairly substantial opportunity. And I think that we should lean into it with some appropriate guardrails in place. And I'm not exactly sure what those, that's part of the conversation as to what that looks like. I think all of us as simulation leaders, simulation experts, and those who work in simulation are quite accustomed to being disruptors. That's what we do. For simulation is literally the disruptive technology from 1995, 2000, early 2000s. Simulation is to healthcare in 2000 what AI might be now. When simulation came in, and many of you might remember this, it was thought, we were still doing studies. Is it better than traditional didactic sessions? We were trying to compare these things, and it's clear that it's a highly effective tool. And so we should be quite accustomed to, as simulation experts, quite used to disrupting the status quo, which I think AI is going to do. And I think that we'll be very well positioned and are well positioned for this. I guess we'll use the word revolution, because I really do think that there's substantial change that's taking place that we haven't seen for quite some time. Now, certainly in healthcare, this is what will happen with some of the AI ideas that will come out. We are literally world leaders in healthcare in red tape technology. So Leave it to us. We will regulate it. Do not worry. I don't think that's the right thing to do fully. I think some oversight is good, but this is where I think we do stifle opportunity. And I'd like to sort of reimagine how we do that so that we can create space for these technologies to be evaluated, to be tested, to be piloted, and to be deployed in a very thoughtful way. But I would ask, and my thought is I'm going to lean into this technology in sort of a startup mentality, in that we don't fully know what the future looks like. We might be able to predict a few days, weeks, months in advance. But by leaning in, I think that I might open my eyes and my ears to some of the opportunities that it's going to bring to us. I do think we can't just have it fully run wild. Some guardrails in place. We'll talk about some of what those challenges look like, but we should think of some downside risks. We should go through those thought processes. And perhaps we don't even necessarily need to think of them. We can pilot test the technologies in the simulation domain, using simulation to see how does AI work with humans. We simulate those interactions, and then we can start to ask questions in debriefings about what is it that we feel uncomfortable with? What do we feel comfortable with? I think what we want more of, and that we are not very good at in medicine, is performance evaluation. I think some of us think that we're not bad at it, but we don't do it at a granular level the way that we would if you look towards any professional sports team. They know how many steps somebody's taken in a day. They know the biomechanical movement of each athlete. They know their acceleration, their deceleration. They know their impact on their their warm-up routine. Did that player warm up? Did they not? How does that impact how they played? What did they eat for dinner last night? Did they sleep long enough? All of these things then can be built to sort of optimize for performance. What this requires is data and data analysis. And this is something that I think is an opportunity for us in healthcare to utilize, and particularly in the simulation space, so that we can start to look and see how can AI help us leverage this performance. Oftentimes it is simulation that is the platform, the vehicle by which we look towards clinicians' performance. Not sometimes in an evaluative way, sometimes summative, sometimes formative, sometimes simply exploratory. And it is these ideas that I think by using some of these newer technologies that we're starting to see, we might have some substantial opportunity. In addition, it really kind of speaks to, data integration. And we're getting better, I think, in healthcare with data, but it absolutely is required to make these tools useful. And so how we might be able to bring in data from other domains, experiences from other domains, and then start to build repositories of data, synthetic data, and what that looks like intertwined within a simulation environment, I think is really quite exciting. Here's where we are right now. This is one example. ChatGPT, I can use, and I think many of you might be using this. I know our teams use this. I use it personally. We develop scenarios using a large language model. This is ChatGPT. I put in, please develop a healthcare simulation scenario to practice the management of ACS at the level of a junior resident. I won't share with all of you, or the whole scenario, but it does a pretty good job. It gives you learning objectives. It tells you, gives you some sample vital signs. You can then go in and tweak it. You could adjust your prompt. You're not quite happy with it. This is fairly efficient. Something that for me, I don't know, might end to end might take me an hour to develop a scenario, write it up, put it in a template, all of that. This can happen in a matter of, I mean, seconds, maybe call it a few minutes by the time I read it, review it, make some tweaks. So I definitely think that there's some savings that are happening already, gains of efficiency, probably on a factor of 50%, if not more, in the current state. And you can see it goes through scenario setup. It gives you a scenario and it walks you through it. And many of you would be familiar with this. Here's some other technology. Can you guys hear this?
Hi, Alex. My name is Susan Lewis. I'm your healthcare provider today.
And so what we're watching here.
Okay,
What's going on?
it's a little hard to breathe.
Is an interaction
I'm sorry to hear that.
with a healthcare provider and
Thank
a
you.
patient.
Can you describe the feeling?
It's tight feeling. It's a tightness.
On a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the worst pain you've ever felt, how would you rate this tightness?
Maybe a 4 out of 10.
Does anything you do make the tightness worse?
Moving around makes it worse.
And so here we have an interaction of a healthcare clinician with a, we've removed the human from the other voice, and we've created effectively an LLM that responds to in real time with a preset case, how the patient is feeling, and they respond, albeit a little bit robotically. So I'm not going to say it's still a little weird to talk to, but the actual content, it's tracked. This is a commercial available product. I don't have any affiliation with, but it shows us sort of where we might now be. This is current state. The other thing that we have is this. This is a patient, a team that's going to virtually intubate a patient.
A few of the cords, we could have our endotracheal tube here.
Again, I don't, these are commercially available, so I don't have any affiliation with them. But what we can see is that now we have multiple learners in a simulated environment, and these tools are now quite powerful, and we can create an environment that is accessible broadly to allow interactivity across a single platform. I think what both of those speak to is this notion of scalability and scaling education, which is an incredibly powerful and something, an approach that we don't think about very often, yet we struggle with. We always need to, or often try to get learners into the sim lab. That's a challenge. Learners are more distributed. We're doing more rural work. We have more work from home. The challenges of burnout. We are trying our best to increase accessibility. And now we have technologies that will allow us in a fairly meaningful way to scale educational content so that we can deploy this without having to have one clinician for every learner. We can have one clinician for 100 learners or 1,000 learners. And there's some other technology that's come out of a company in Australia where they've created modules where you can interact in a pretty impressive way with an avatar to practice different difficult conversations. And those have been created, and now you as a learner can practice that, whereas previously we would bring you into the sim lab, have a standardized patient who's been trained, and really not a scalable model. And so now this idea of scalability, I think, is one of the really exciting aspects of something that we battle from a funding perspective, from a resource perspective, that hinders our growth within the simulation environment, so that if we are interested in metrics and impact, this is an opportunity for us. What does the future look like? I think it's pretty bright. I think it's really exciting. When I last spoke about this, I think I was maybe a bit more cautious. I'm like full tilt all in on AI as its utility in healthcare, in medical education, and in simulation. I think what's important though, and this is probably the part that I don't want to have miss, or that we as a community don't want to miss, is the integration of us as simulationists, as simulation experts, into the actual design deployment of these AI technologies. So frequently, these technologies, someone comes up with an idea, which is great. They get capital, they get funded, and they deploy it into the clinical arena, devoid or minimally involvement of clinicians. As a result, you have a high risk of failure for many of these technologies because, as all of you know, when you design something that doesn't really meet the needs of the end user, it can fall flat. Certainly, the end user doesn't always know what they need, but we want to be involved in that creation process. And if we can, what we have as simulationists is a arena by which these technologies can be tested, so that before you go to market, you can bring in clinicians to observe and watch in real time how these technologies interact if it's something for patient care, we can allow for accurate and authentic data collection so that the company designing it can get real-time feedback to iterate on that so that they have a more successful launch. And so it is really something that we as simulationists, this is the biggest area I think that we can add value, is not so much how do we use simulation to educate better, which I think has incredible value, which we just talked about, but it's how can we work with these companies, with these technologies, to help explore AI with clinicians. And I can tell you right now, we have a technology in our ED that is supposed to tell us which patients really just are going to be quick. Okay, so it reviews triage notes, vitals, all of these things. So I work in an emergency department at St. Mike's, and it tells us these things. Oh, that sounds good. So that means that me as a doc, I can look and it flags it and I can go see that patient very quickly. Okay, that's fine. Doesn't mean that I don't have to see the other patients. Or the challenge, however, is what about my colleagues? How do they feel if I just go and see all of the patients that just need something simple? They're left with all of these more complex decisions. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but these are the questions that come up. So if we back up and said, you know what, here's an idea, let's run this in a simulated environment. How will this work? Let's run 30 minutes of a mock emergency department in a simulated environment. What is it going to look like when we use this technology? What will be the behaviors that are probably unpredictable or difficult to predict of the emerge docs as they start picking up different patients? How will they respond to the interface? Will they respond to the interface? And make changes prior to the deployment of this technology. So I think where we have AI workflow as imagined. Those are the workflows imagined by the technology companies, the developers of these technologies. Yet we have AI workflow as done. And sometimes the AI is amazing, the technology is great, and you can't imagine how you could have lived without it. But sometimes it just sort of falls flat. And it's that human element that is sometimes missing. And it's there, that intersection that the AI workflow as simulated offers. That's where we, as simulationists, fit within to bridge that gap and to explore how we will be using the technology. Does it need to be edited? Does it need to be iterated on? Is it working as expected? And it's this domain that I think we have some real power. The other element that I've just started thinking about is really understanding, studying, and perhaps teaching learners to use, pardon me, I wrote in the wrong thing, to use AI at the bedside. So using simulation, we can use AI technologies at the bedside, understand how do learners use it. Perhaps, commonly we bring learners into the simulated environment, and we give them a case, and they're effectively there to rely on their memory. But increasingly, learners are not relying on their memory when they move into the actual clinical arena. They're going to pull out ChatGPT on their phone and say, what's my differential for this case? They might put in the actual prompt. They may at some point be able to put in, the data. Maybe it'll actually get imported from their EMR at some point. And so we would want to be able to teach learners how to use that technology effectively over the long term, because the days of sitting down and memorizing content, as far as I can tell, should be over. And it requires a massive reimagination of how we as medical educators think about the education of learners in the future for future clinicians. The other piece that I think is really cool and really interesting is using AI to drive the development of simulation. So we can use it across the educational domain, the quality improvement, patient safety events, and healthcare trends. Imagine if we could take data from all of the internal medicine residency exams across the country, feed that in to a model that then helps us better create and customize bespoke simulations based on last year's results of an exam, because there were deficiencies that were, that we as educators would have missed. And we can now use AI to look for trends that are difficult to see, that require more time that we just don't have, but that we can create and meet the users, the learners where they're at. Maybe we can use AI to analyze, and this is already starting to happen, analyze events in the hospital. Where are the trends in our hospital of patient safety events that have occurred, adverse outcomes, challenging situations, and use that, because we've identified a theme, not simply one-offs, but a pattern, and then insert that into our translational sim program so that we can customize the next few weeks, the next few sessions of simulation to meet the needs of the clinicians. They may not even know that there's a pattern because they're on a ward where this event hasn't happened yet, or it simply just felt like a one-off. But in fact, there might be a pattern across an institution. More interestingly, from there and scaling up, we use AI to evaluate healthcare trends at a global level. Imagine that we could have started to foresee what was going to happen with COVID, and that we could have had an even faster response to the development of simulation training based on the needs of those who would be providing care, in environments where, for example, PPE is required, or whatever the niche element of the healthcare trend that's happening at a global level. And so it's these the AI and the ability to evaluate large amounts of data that we really as humans aren't so good at, that can really drive forward our simulation development, again, representing a pretty interesting and really cool opportunity moving forward. We have other ideas that, have been kicked around. What about before we run a simulation the day before, we have a learner who can interact with a chatbot because they know that they're going to be coming into the sim lab to run a trauma resuscitation tomorrow. And while we can certainly look up content, it's sometimes difficult to get the answers for more nuanced questions that we want. But if I can interact as a learner with a chatbot that's been validated and vetted with high quality content that has gone through all of the literature, then I can ask in more colloquial terms what I want to know. How do I clear that C-spine? How do I evaluate that patient's abdomen in this particular setting? I can get some interesting answers that I can then use tomorrow when I go in and run a trauma resuscitation. And it will actually make me feel more comfortable in doing so. And then finally, debriefing, can we capture, and we see this now with the technologies that are available. It's quite easy. Otter AI exists that pairs up with our Zoom sessions, and it gives you an immediate summary within minutes of everything that happened and really cuts down on the time and effort required. And now we have a beautiful summary that we can use and send out to learners so that they can review. In addition, maybe I missed something as the facilitator. And so if I have AI also being that second set of eyes on a debriefing, then I can quickly review that before we start the debrief to capture something that otherwise I wouldn't have seen. There's certainly challenges in this, and AI has, is gonna, it's a new technology, so there's and new ideas and new ways of doing things. So for sure, we might find problems. I mean, the biggest one is data. For these to be valid, we need high quality data. If we put in terrible data, then we're really not going to get very far. So linking with EMRs and how do we do that, maintaining, and we'll talk about it in a second, but maintaining privacy, I think is important. This is, whatever the data goes in will inevitably have a bias, whatever that direction goes in terms of the quality of the data. Where does that data come from? Is the data all from high income countries? Is it from low or middle income countries? What does that look like across our diverse population? Are there populations that are underrepresented, overrepresented, and as a result might shift how these models respond? And so while we won't be able to, quote, eliminate bias, that's impossible, being attentive to it and calling it out when we identify it is, I think, where we need to be devoting our time. And as I already alluded to, this idea of privacy is certainly important. We have guardrails in place for privacy and data, yet at the same time, we have this tension. We need this data to build out these models. And how do we do that in a way that maintains patient privacy, learner privacy? I don't know that we have these answers yet. And finally, these technologies may not be cheap. They continue to come down in price by massive amounts, but they still cost money. And so are we getting the ROI on these? If we go and spend $100,000 on a particular model, is that going to give us the return that we want? And so continually evaluating that really is important due to the price tags that some of these bring. Long term, we want to think about sustainability. What does it look like financially, culturally, clinically, ethically, to name a few? And I think to some degree, the use and deployment of AI within the simulation space and within healthcare broadly will happen regardless. So it's up to us to be stewards and to be attentive to this and these elements. This is what Rumsfeld said, and I think that this speaks to AI as well. There are also unknown unknowns, the ones we don't know, and there's going to be things that pop up that we simply couldn't predict. We might be able to simulate though. And so looking forward in the future, imagining a hospital where we have AI simulation integrated teams, where we have data that feeds into our simulation program so that we understand exactly what's happening within the hospital, and we can use that to design accurately our simulations, customize them for the needs of our learners. We can deploy scalable education programs so that we don't need to bring in standardized patients for every learner, but we can deploy this easily from learners being at home. We can use both education and patient data sets to customize the simulations for our teams to run resuscitations. We'll get data back, and we can use AI to analyze these far better than what we might be able to do as humans. And then we can target elements in healthcare that will lead towards improvement. And hopefully this will have some degree of a tangible ROI, where we can have positive impact on patient outcomes, positive impact on learner outcomes, positive impact on efficiencies, and overall an elevation and optimization of the care that we're delivering. I want to thank a few folks that have given me feedback on this. And with that, I'll pause, stop, and open up for questions.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Excellent talk. Very thought-provoking. I'm going to open it up for questions because I know we have some excellent, some big thinkers here. I think I saw Owen O'Sullivan, who did a sim fellowship in the Maudsley, and we have Michael Mack, who's another simulation, passionate about sim. Hi, Owen.
I have so many questions.
I knew you would get us started.
It's just trying to think. Andrew, it's such a interesting talk.
Thank
I
you.
think I was working in multi-simulation in 2020. I started in February with loads of nice ideas about in-person sim, and then March happened, and we were consumed with pivoting to digital really over the following months. And the big gift with that was twofold, like accessibility for learners, not just beyond the city we were in, but across the country and other countries as well, where they couldn't access that training otherwise. And also for people maybe who in practical terms couldn't get into training or had more simple reasons. The other thing was the scalability. And I was thinking, wonder what your thoughts are on, the future of that for medical students, when I suspect you and I have maybe similar experiences, strong emphasis on history taking, you go into the hospitals, it's a little bit like, there can be gossip between medical students about who's a good history to take, what might come up in exams, and the scope now to standardize that and to democratize it in a sense. I'm just wondering how we might marshal that and how we might roll that out. Have you any reflections on that?
I mean, I don't know, is the short answer. I do think, being attentive to the fact that this is like a very different way, and the power of the tools here that we have is like nothing we've ever seen. The example I gave at the very beginning of a case of me listening to a podcast and hearing a vignette and me trying to think through it. And I've been doing emergency medicine for now 11 years. I spend a lot of time reading and trying to keep up. I had a sense, I was like, okay, I think I know what I would do, but I didn't know the answer to the case. I've heard of that diagnosis that the patient had. But the way in which we would then, like, why wouldn't we just give, a learner that tool to be able to put in the history that they gather? And in fact, your history may not even need to be very good. I put in a terrible vignette. It was like a 3-line vignette and it gave me the answer. So I don't know. I think it requires us to really rethink about how we do stuff. I'm not for sure somebody out there is going to be like, we can't remove the interpersonal element of, I get it. I'm not saying like I don't want to lose my job. So, full disclosure. But I think that we can't sort of just let this pass us by. We should involve ourselves in the process. And where simulation fits in is like, how can we work with a learner to understand how they might use these tools in now a simulated environment, so that when they go and use it in a real patient, that they're doing so in a thoughtful way, that they're using it appropriately, they understand when AI hallucinates, how to detect that. And so I don't know the answer, but I think, putting blinders on and hoping it doesn't happen, I think is crazy. I think that we do want to lean into it. Why, we're all, I see the list of people here, all experts in education and simulation. We should be the ones sort of inserting ourselves into that process to help expose and maybe just simply provide a platform for testing. I don't know. But I think that, yeah, we want to be part of it rather than not.
And I can add 2 cents to that, because like you, Andrew, I'm using AI a lot in every which way possible in the simulation world. So from scenario creation, all the way up to, generating those avatars, and using ChatGPT to even debrief simulations. So I think I fully agree with you that we are on a precipice here, and we can decide how things evolve. We are the content experts in our various fields. When I design a simulation scenario, I still need the content expert to eyeball that scenario, because there are little, I was working with surgical foundations, and I sent them the scenario, and they're like, this is not, this is a day surgery. So the fact that you're creating a sim where it's post-op day 3, it doesn't make sense in Toronto, right? So there is all these little nuances that perhaps AI will not be privy to, and where we still need that expertise. But I agree with you. As a child, I remember, the Encyclopedia Britannica, people coming around selling encyclopedias, right? And my dad feeling so proud that he was able to buy this for his children. And look at how far we've come. My kids would laugh me out the door, right? Because they just go on the iPad and they look stuff up on Google, and they're telling me, historical facts, details. So I agree with you. To sit back and say, this is too scary, we're not going to use this, is to miss out on an opportunity to really hone our skills and move to a next level in terms of patient care and what we can offer. And I think Michael Mack is taking off, putting on his camera. So are you going to say something, Mike? Because I don't want to do all the talking here.
Great presentation. I'm going to do clinic now. See ya.
Bye. Yeah, no,
Did you follow up on that? Or I mean, you had sort of posed the question, but I don't know if you had some also insights and thoughts on sort of where you think.
is that for Owen?
Yeah.
Personally, I was probably similar to you, Andrew. I was a little bit guarded, thought it was just going to be unbridled application, and then I started just playing around with it myself, and I started using avatars for language learning, and I was so impressed by the potential of it. And I've seen colleagues use it also for interview preparation. And then I immediately started thinking about how you could use a virtual avatars in mental health simulation. And in terms of that scalability thing, obviously the actors are costly. They're very skilled and talented, but they're not going to be widely available, and you're not going to have specialists, medical role player acting agencies in every small town. I think that is really going to empower other centers, not just in big cities, but other centers to be able to roll out this. I was interested in your point about being able to distill large volumes of data to be able to recognize specific learning needs that evolve within a service, within a population, within a region. I think that's definitely going to be helpful. But it's about judicious application as well. It's still costly, it's still onerous, there's an opportunity cost of using SIM. A bit analogous to QI. There's exuberance around QI and it's great and everything, but it's misused. And sometimes, you're using a hammer to drive a nail. So it needs to be judicious, I think, as well. But I think, to go back to maybe my question initially, it is, I think AI is about to fundamentally change our relationship with knowledge. And that's going to impact universities and med schools, no doubt. So
That's a good quote. You should.
Hmm?
That's a great quote. It's going to fundamentally.
I've probably paraphrased it from some podcast, so please don't give me credit for it.
Oh, well, you get
Yeah.
credit here. You get credit here.
Yeah.
It's a great quote.
Any other questions, comments, kudos? Tim.
I always have something. Hey, Andrew.
Tim, see you.
Andrew, I know in your other day job, you focus so much on performance enhancement and teamwork in a space. And I know I at least I think you've worked with technologies like motion tracking. Have you started to work or seen others working with AI systems to assess the movement, the interactions, the communications of people within a space as they try to do whatever it is they need to do as effectively as possible?
Great question. So a couple thoughts. One, I think that it's very doable. The technology, is harder than maybe we think initially. Like black box technology from out of Toronto, actually. That was kind of the, Dr. Grancharov's group was at like the forefront of this, maybe 10 years ago, thinking of this. Now the technology wasn't there yet. His ideas were there, but this idea that you could sort of understand what's happening and analyze in a larger resuscitation environment by video capture, then motion, cadence of voice, sound in the space, doors opening, closing, all of these types of things, and then whether that predicts an outcome for a patient, looking at vital signs, all that is stuff that these ideas have come out. I haven't seen it be played out quite as well as I'd hope by now. Our motion tracking stuff is quite primitive, though. Interestingly, well, one, I think it will get solved very quickly. Like, I think we could solve that if somebody actually wants to, in some way now. I have just been playing around with Replit. Are you familiar with that? Check it out. I can't tell you that it works yet but it's an app that it creates apps for you by putting in regular prompts. So if you want to, you don't need to code.
Can you put that in the chat? Andrew, just type
Replit.
how to spell Replit. Yeah.
Replit.
Replit, okay.
So you put in the prompt in English or whatever language you speak. I don't know if it does other languages, but in common language, and it codes the program or the app for you. It creates it. So actually, I was just in the process of trying to figure out how to do movement tracking. And I've created an app. I just haven't put in the video yet I'm going to give it a resuscitation and ask it to move and track around like I've done before, but we did it like manually and then created some kind of interesting videos. But when I put it in, I said, I'm a simulationist. I do healthcare simulation. I gave it a little prompt. I want to track movement within a resuscitation space. So I put it in, and then it came back and asked me, do you want it to also do heat maps? And it was asking me stuff. I'm like, damn, those are really good ideas. And so stuff that I was like, this is pretty good. I can't tell you it works yet, but this is just an app that creates, that will create you an app based on just.
Andrew, I think your next SimCity rounds is going to be happening soon. Where you're going to tell us about that Replit app you're making.
Yeah. Anyways, so the answer, Tim, is no, but I'm hoping, and I'd love, if there are groups out there looking at trying to explore that, I'd love to connect with them. Have you come across any, Tim?
I mean, the closest I've come is, I believe I've seen a couple papers about using several AI models, like a combination of computer vision and large language models, to evaluate a learner performance in a sim scenario video recording instead of having trained scorers. I think that's, again, like, it's primitive, but it's starting to happen. The other, like, starting to touch on this example is, I know of someone who is trying to build, again, using computer vision, a tool where you can either take a series of pictures of a space or a video of a space, send it in and say, send me a list of latent safety threats based on what you see in this space.
Remarkable. That's like 5 years of my work done in 30 seconds.
Translational sim, yeah.
It's like my whole career. Now
So,
well, like you said in your talk, it's not that people are going to be out of jobs, but we're going to have to think about how we're going to configure things to accommodate this sort of intelligence and this this novel area. But I agree, we need to teach residents and medical students how to use AI at the bedside and minimize cognitive load, because right now that's what I struggle with, that cognitive load of carrying too much up here. And if AI could relieve me of some of that, then I'm all for it. So we're at 4 minutes to the hour. I don't want to miss the opportunity while Tim's camera is on to say that our next SimCity rounds in May of 2025 is going to be none other than our president and CEO of Simulation Canada, Dr. Tim Willett, who's going to be talking about virtual simulation, the possibilities, and the evidence. So stay tuned for that. Mark your calendars for May 22nd at the lunch hour. We're always grateful to have you. Andrew, as always, you're a fantastic, excellent speaker. And of course, the topic is definitely contemporary, relevant, and exciting. So I look forward to the next time you grace us, our SimCity rounds, with your presence. And I wish everyone a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks again.
thank you, Petal.
Take care.